Holly, let me ask you first about the experience you have as a hearing impaired person, as a deaf person. Has it been your experience your entire life? Were you born deaf?
Yes. So actually, before I answer that question, just to kind of lay some rules and some general education, I know that hearing impaired it's considered the politically correct term. Many people believe that to be so. Most deaf people, though, in the deaf community that use sign language primarily, prefer the term deaf or hard of hearing. Hearing impaired really, it's seen as a negative. It's seen as a deficiency. It shows that a deaf person is less than a hearing person in some way. So, just in general, the deaf community prefers just to be called deaf. And I know that's an interesting point for most hearing people, but yeah, that's the term that we use. As far as to your question, yes, I was born deaf. I was raised with both an oral education and a sign language education, which meant I learned how to speak, I learned how to speech read, and I learned sign language. Both of my parents were special ed teachers, so they already knew sign. They taught me as I was growing up, and they also were able to teach me speech as well. I think that they just wanted to give me the most opportunity for access in my life. They just wanted to make sure that I was successful no matter what.
Well, then let's talk about, obviously, most of our audience is going to be folks who can hear. And I'm really curious to see how you experience music. When did you come to know that you loved music, and what music really stood out for you?
It's tough to pinpoint. My father is a huge music guy. He really loves bands like Pearl Jam, U2. So I was raised around that quite a bit growing up.
So your dad's about my age then.
Yeah, actually about. I would say so. So I could listen to it with headphones. I could experience it, and I could read the words from like the liner notes. I could feel it, the vibrations. That was always a great sensation for me. And it was kind of like, it's hard to explain. Music helped me out through my life, just like it does for lots of people. Music was there through ups and downs and just all throughout my life. I was able to, it just spoke to me, just like it does for anybody, I would imagine. The kind of music that I typically listen to is rock, Pearl Jam, U2, like from my childhood. I'm a big Mumford & Sons fan. That's my favorite band. 21 Pilots is another of my favorites. So mostly in that rock alternative genre. I like a beat that you can feel. Something that's a little bit bassier, heavier that I can feel in my chest.
Can you describe the experience, the difference of listening to music, let's say in your parents' home, which is a relatively quiet experience. Perhaps you can feel the vibrations and the music in a different way than it would attending a concert.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I feel like a concert, you know how you feel the energy, you feel everybody there singing the same songs together, and especially when there's an interpreter there who's interpreting along with the music, it gives me full access to everything that's going on. I can feel, the lights, the energy. You can feel that sense of camaraderie, of community, that you feel that togetherness when you're at a concert all singing the same lyrics. I absolutely experience that. At home, I would say that it's the same kind of thing. Obviously, you don't get that big sense of community, but you still have that experience from listening to the music that it speaks to your soul. Mm-hmm. So if I'm cleaning the house or doing work or whatever, I'll just throw my headphones on. It's definitely an important part of my life, just like for most of your listeners.
So our concert venues set up in a way so that people who are deaf can experience it the same way. Are there interpretive opportunities? Do you think venues are aware that there are people who are deaf who want to attend concerts and experience the same thing, but maybe need, I'm going to say additional, some sort of other aspects to it so that they can really experience the concert?
Well, that is a pretty loaded question, to tell you the truth. The venues. So a lot of the venues will provide interpreters. They will. That's been my experience. They'll provide, lighting for the interpreters. They'll provide proper placements. That does happen. However, not without a fight. Many other venues, you have to fight quite a bit in order to get the services that you need to enjoy, to have access to a concert like that. It all actually starts when you first contact the venue to set up the interpreting services. Typically, there isn't an easy way to do that. Maybe you'll contact the guest service department or send them an email or give them a call. Oftentimes, though, you get the runaround. They'll say, oh, you need to contact this department or this manager. No one really ever knows who is responsible for setting that up. It can be a very lengthy, time-consuming runaround. That's definitely how it all starts.
Any signs that this is getting better? Is this a lack of education?
That is also another loaded question. Honestly, I think in general, it is a service that deaf people need. It's required by law. Let me try to. Sorry, I'm trying to just figure out how I want to articulate this. I think that people assume that all accessible seats or handicapped access is going to be for people in wheelchairs. So what often happens is a venue will stick a deaf person and an interpreter in a wheelchair accessible place, but that is not, we don't have the same disability and the access is different. The barrier to access for us is hearing. It's the sound and the doorway to access is going to be visually. What we need is closer access to the stage, not necessarily in the front, but closer. We need to be able to visually be able to have access to the stage, to the performers on stage, the same line of sight between the performers and the interpreters. We have to, sometimes venues will, let me back up here. So sometimes, so what we need is visual access and closer to the stage, same line of sight with the performers and the interpreters. When we're put back in those handicap areas, we don't always get the proper lighting. It really, whenever you're in the front, you can usually depend on the show lights. We need to be able to see the interpreters, obviously, in order to get that access. We also need to be able to see the performers. We want to see their facial expressions. What you can hear, their emotion. You can hear who is being featured on the stage as far as who is speaking, who is singing, who is having their solo. That's something that we visually see. When we're stuck back, all the way in the nosebleeds, that's not something that we have access to, and that makes it lesser of an experience than the hearing people there.
So how far in advance do you need to know? Do you see a concert schedule and say, I want to see Pearl Jam, for example, or another band, and know that you're going to have to contact that venue way in advance to make sure that they actually take into account your needs?
Well, the biggest thing is that interpreters need time to prepare. The interpreters need to know the songs, they need to know the lyrics, and of course we need to set up the placement, the lighting, all of that for visual access. Typically, I try to give venues a few months' notice if possible. So there have been times when, let's say I wanted to see a show in September, I let that venue know all the way back as soon as February. That actually happened at a local venue here. Wow. What often happens, though, is that venues often don't give a lot of credence to how much time interpreters need. They waited until 2 days before the show to set up the interpreters, which meant I had unprepared interpreters and didn't have, adequate access to that show. That seems to happen a lot, unfortunately, that venues just don't understand what goes into a performance interpreter's preparation. That unfortunately has been an experience that has happened here in the Valley quite a bit.
Again, and I want to ask another loaded question, which I've done a lot of, but does it matter based on the size of the venue? Are those that play the bigger shows, are they, even if the arena is larger, are they more prepared for this?
Well, if I'm being honest, the smaller the venue is typically better. They typically will have a lot more flexibility. The examples that I just previously spoke about giving the venue multiple months notice and then them not setting up the interpreter until the last minute, that was actually one of the largest venues in the Valley, and it happens quite a bit. The smaller venues tend to be a little bit better, not a ton better. It's not a huge difference, but better by degrees for sure.
So if you were able to send a specific message, and you've probably already done this, but so our listeners get an experience with this. What are the specific things you would say to a venue if you could say, this is the list of things you need to do in order for a deaf person to actually experience the concert in the same way as a non-deaf person?
That's a good question. I would say be responsive to emails. I would say if the deaf consumer has a specific interpreter by name that they prefer to work with, I would honor that. Some venues prefer that the deaf consumer buy their ticket prior to setting up interpreting services. Some prefer you to first let them know about the interpreter services and then buy the ticket after. Figuring out what that process is and making that apparent to their consumers would be great. I think a really important thing is to be able to make sure that the venues know that we need to set up the interpreter in a place where the deaf attendees can see the interpreter and see the stage with proper lighting. That may mean that you need to move your seats or move the seats of someone else who has auditory access to the concert. I think that it's important too because some places they think that deaf people are just trying to get moved to the front row or get some sort of preferential treatment. It really is not true. I mean, yes, it is a little bit of a perk to be able to be closer, obviously, but that's not our goal. Our goal is just to enjoy that experience and be able to experience that event the same way everybody else does.
Are some artists and performers more responsive to this? Do they ever put aside this idea of, we want to make sure that we are attentive to the needs of the deaf community? Is there awareness generally among performers?
Honestly, it's more about the production company, it seems. The artists don't really ever seem to be involved in any of the pre-decision making or the communication between the interpreters and the venue. So if there's some sort of hurdle, it seems to be the production manager or whoever's in charge of that particular show, not so much the artists.
Mm-hmm. What about and obviously Cameo is accepted here, but are there certain interpreters that are a better fit for this type of show? We talked about the preparation needed in advance. Are there some interpreters that for a particular concert are just a better fit? I mean, is that ever delegated or delineated in some way?
Honestly, in my experience, I'm not sure. Now, I've experienced quite a few different interpreters, and some, maybe aren't quite as expressive. I really prefer interpreters who are incredibly expressive, who really I can experience the concert through their facial expression and through their beautiful signs. There are certain interpreters that I will request to work with, and that just give me a better window into the experience that the hearing people are having, for sure.
Well, they want to like the music, I imagine. That makes it more fun for you, too.
Yeah. Even if honestly the interpreter doesn't like the music or doesn't like the band, it's still part of their job. I mean, they're there to provide an equivalent message. They're there to show exactly what the same sort of energy that the performer is putting out on stage. So yeah, part of their entire job is to match the emotion that is coming out from the performers on stage. And certain interpreters are better at that than others.
Holly, have you had experience with, let's say, theater, musical theater, that kind of thing? Is that something you enjoy as well, and is that different than going to a concert?
To be honest, I don't have a lot of experience going to things like musical theater. I have been every once in a while. I know Gamage, the shows that they have there, I believe they have, I don't know if it's one, I believe they have one show per run that they will provide an interpreter for. So for one run, they'll pick one show and have an interpreter there at that show. It gets a little tricky there. There are quite a few barriers for getting to that one show. Obviously, you need to be available on that one day that they provide access, and it's not always the easiest to get the seats that you need in the section where the interpreter is going to sit. Those sell out pretty quickly, and the Gamage doesn't seem to hold them too well. So it's not always easy to get into the musical theater part of the arts.
I don't think listeners need to know your personal schedule or anything, but any concerts you're looking forward to coming up?
Oh, gosh. Yes, definitely. Later this year, I'm actually going to be going to California for Coldplay, and 30 Seconds to Mars. I think that's coming up this year so far, but I'm keeping my eyes open.
Well, Holly, those are all the questions I had for you. Did we miss anything that you guys wanted to make sure we talked about?
I'm trying to think. I don't know. I don't think so. Let's see. We touched on the venues. I think we kind of covered everything.
Okay. Holly, thanks for coming in.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.